The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Texas highway as Jack Harmon revved the engine of his Harley-Davidson. At 45, Jack was a creature of habit. Every weekday for the past 15 years, he'd taken the same route to Redwood Construction, where he worked as a site manager. The rumble of his motorcycle beneath him was as familiar as his own heartbeat, a constant in a life that had seen its share of inconstancy. This particular Tuesday in September started like any other. The summer heat was finally breaking, giving way to the crisp promise of fall. Jack had his thermos of black coffee secured in his saddlebag and Willie Nelson playing through his helmet speakers. He was making good time, too, having left his small ranch house on the outskirts of Austin 20 minutes earlier than usual. His mind wandered as he rode, thinking about the new development project they were breaking ground on that day. It was a big contract, a community center that would serve the eastern neighborhoods of Austin, areas that had long been overlooked for public investment. Jack took pride in his work, in creating spaces that would bring people together. The highway eventually gave way to city streets, and Jack slowed as he entered a more residential area. This part of his route took him through an older neighborhood, where small, tidy houses with chain-link fences sat alongside vacant lots and the occasional business. That's when he heard it, so faint that at first, he thought it might be a problem with his bike. A high-pitched squeak, barely audible over the engine. Jack frowned beneath his helmet and eased off the throttle, coasting to the side of the road. There it was again, definitely not his motorcycle. Jack cut the engine and removed his helmet, hanging it from the handlebar. The sound was clearer now, a pitiful, desperate cry that seemed to be coming from a pile of garbage bags stacked near the curb. It was trash day in this neighborhood, and a garbage collector was making his way down the street about half a block away, methodically emptying bins into his cart. Jack swung his leg over his bike and walked toward the trash pile, his work boots crunching on the gravel shoulder of the road. The crying sound continued, intermittent but increasingly desperate. "Hello," Jack called out, feeling a bit foolish. He nudged one of the bags with his boot, and the crying stopped momentarily before resuming with renewed vigor. The garbage collector, a thin man in his 60s with deeply tanned skin and a municipal uniform that had seen better days, had reached Jack's location. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "Mornin'," the man said, eyeing Jack in the trash pile with mild curiosity. "Morning," Jack replied. "I think there's something alive in here." The garbage collector raised his eyebrows, but didn't seem particularly surprised. Wouldn't be the first time. Raccoons get into trash all the time around here. But Jack shook his head. This didn't sound like a raccoon. The cry was too plaintive, too young. Carefully, he began moving the bags aside. The garbage collector, whose name tag identified him as Ray, set down his cart and came to help, albeit with a resigned air that suggested he'd seen it all in his years on the job. "There," Ray said suddenly, pointing. Jack followed his gaze and felt his heart sink. Sitting on top of a stained, torn garbage bag was a puppy, tiny, trembling, and desperately frightened. Its coat, which might have been a golden color under different circumstances, was matted with dirt and what looked like food scraps. The pup couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, its eyes barely open, its small body shaking with fear or cold or both. "Well, I'll be damned," Ray muttered, shaking his head. "Some people, I swear." Jack carefully reached out toward the puppy, which flinched but didn't try to run away. It was too weak, too frightened. "Hey, little one," Jack said softly, his voice gentler than anyone at the construction site would have believed possible. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The puppy whimpered but allowed Jack to stroke its head with one careful finger. "You know who it belongs to?" Jack asked Ray, though he could already guess the answer. Ray shook his head. "Nope, and I've been working this route for 12 years. People dump unwanted animals all the time. Usually they at least have the decency to leave him at a shelter, though." Jack felt a surge of anger. Who would do this? Who would take a helpless puppy and toss it out with the garbage, leaving it to die? The puppy squeaked again, and this time, Jack realized it wasn't just making noise, it was calling for something. Or someone. The puppy's head was turned toward a grimy blue bag partially visible beneath the one it was sitting on. Heart pounding, Jack carefully lifted the puppy and placed it in the crook of his arm. Then, with his free hand, he reached for the blue bag. It was heavier than he expected, and as he pulled it free from the pile, he heard another squeak from inside. A chill ran down his spine despite the morning heat. Holding his breath, Jack untied the knot at the top of the bag and peered inside. Opening the bag, the guy began to cry. He couldn't believe who could do such a thing. Inside was another puppy, identical to the first, cowering in terror at the bottom of the bag. This one looked even worse off than its sibling, its breathing shallow, its tiny body curled into a tight ball of fear. "Son of a bitch," Jack whispered, tears stinging his eyes. He wasn't a sentimental man by nature, but the sight of these two tiny, helpless creatures discarded like trash broke something open inside him. "Who does this?" Ray sighed heavily, looking genuinely disturbed despite his earlier nonchalance. "I don't know, man. I really don't. Found a whole litter of kittens once, tied up in a sack. People can be real monsters sometimes." Jack carefully lifted the second puppy from the bag. It was even smaller than the first, possibly the runt of the litter. Both puppies were trembling, but they leaned toward each other instinctively, seeking comfort in their shared warmth. "What would have happened if I hadn't stopped?" Jack asked, his voice tight with emotion. Ray didn't meet his eyes. "They would have gone to the dump with the rest of the trash. Happens more than people think." Jack stood there on the side of the road, a puppy in each hand, their tiny hearts beating against his palms. He had a job to get to, responsibilities, deadlines. He was already going to be late. But looking down at these two abandoned souls, he knew there was no choice to make. "I'm taking them," he said firmly. Ray nodded, seeming relieved. "Good man. Better than the alternative. You sure you don't know who might have left them here?" Ray shrugged. "Could have been anyone. These bags weren't here when I came through last week. But this neighborhood's seen better days. A lot of people moving out, moving on." He gestured to a boarded-up house across the street. "Might have been squatters. They come and go." Jack nodded, carefully tucking both puppies into his jacket, zipping it partway to create a makeshift pouch. They squirmed a bit but then settled, clearly exhausted and overwhelmed. "Thanks for your help, Ray." "Didn't do much," Ray replied, but he looked pleased nonetheless. "You take care of those little ones now." Jack returned to his motorcycle, mind racing. He couldn't take the puppies to work with him, and he certainly couldn't ride with them in his jacket. They needed care, food, warmth, maybe even a vet. Making a quick decision, he pulled out his phone and called his foreman, Dave. "Dave, it's Jack. Listen, I'm not going to make it in today. Family emergency." It wasn't entirely a lie, he decided, looking down at the tiny creatures nestled against his chest. "Can you handle the groundbreaking without me? All the permits are in order, and the plans are in my desk drawer." Dave was surprised but accommodating. In 15 years, Jack had never missed a day of work without advance notice. Whatever the emergency was, it had to be serious. With that taken care of, Jack gently placed the puppies in his saddlebag, making sure they had enough air and padding for a short journey. Then he turned his motorcycle around and headed for home. Jack's ranch house was small but well-maintained, with a fenced yard that had been more aspirational than practical when he'd bought the place 5 years ago. He'd always thought he might get a dog someday, but work always seemed to get in the way. Now, it seemed, the decision had been made for him, at least temporarily. The first order of business was getting the puppies cleaned up. They were filthy and smelled terrible, their fur caked with substances Jack didn't want to identify. He filled his kitchen sink with lukewarm water and, as gently as he could, bathed each puppy in turn. The smaller one, a female, he discovered, was so weak she hardly protested the bath. Her brother put up a bit more of a fight, squirming and squeaking, but even he seemed to realize that Jack was trying to help. As the dirt washed away, Jack could see that they were indeed golden retrievers, their fur a pale cream color that would likely darken as they grew. They were painfully thin beneath their now clean coats, their ribs visible, their bellies distended. "When was the last time you two ate?" Jack murmured, wrapping them carefully in a clean towel. He didn't have any puppy food, of course, but a quick internet search on his phone suggested that warm, diluted milk would do in a pinch. He heated some on the stove, tested it on his wrist as he'd seen mothers do with baby bottles, and then used a small turkey baster to carefully feed each puppy. They were ravenous, sucking eagerly at the makeshift dropper, milk dribbling down their chins. Jack smiled despite himself, feeling a strange warmth spreading through his chest. These tiny creatures trusted him implicitly, relied on him completely. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. Once they'd eaten their fill, The puppies curled up together in the towel, exhausted from their ordeal. Jack carried them to his living room and settled them on the couch beside him, watching their tiny chests rise and fall with each breath. His phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "Everything okay? Need anything?" Jack stared at the message for a long moment, then typed out a reply. "Found 2 abandoned puppies on my way to work. Couldn't leave them. Going to take them to the vet when they wake up." Dave's response was immediate. "Need me to come by after work? My sister's a vet tech." Jack felt a surge of gratitude for his friend. "That would be great. Thanks." Setting his phone aside, Jack gently stroked the sleeping puppies with one finger. "Looks like we've got some help coming," he told them softly. "You're going to be okay." He just hoped it was a promise he could keep. By the time Dave arrived with his sister, Melissa, the puppies had awakened and were a bit more alert, though still weak and frightened by their new surroundings. Melissa, a no-nonsense woman in her 30s with a practical ponytail and capable hands, examined each puppy thoroughly on Jack's kitchen table. "They're severely malnourished," she confirmed, her expression grim. "Probably have worms, too. The little girl's the worst off. She's anemic, and her heart rate is too slow. But they're fighters, I'll give them that." "Will they make it?" Jack asked, voicing the fear that had been growing all day as he watched the smaller puppy struggle to keep up with her brother. Melissa looked at him directly. "Hard to say. The next 48 hours will be critical. They need proper nutrition, warmth, and probably some medication." She reached into the duffel bag she'd brought and began pulling out supplies. Puppy formula, tiny bottles, deworming medication, a heating pad. "I brought everything I could think of," she explained. "We'll need to feed them every 2 hours, including through the night. Can you manage that?" Jack nodded without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." Dave clapped him on the shoulder. "That's what I told her you'd say." Jack Harmon, tough guy on the outside, marshmallow on the inside. Jack rolled his eyes, but there was no heat in it. "Shut up and show me how to mix this formula, will you?" For the next hour, Melissa demonstrated how to properly feed the puppies, check their temperature, and administer the medications she'd brought. She showed Jack how to stimulate them to use the bathroom, explaining that puppies this young couldn't do it on their own. "They're about 3 weeks old," she estimated. Eyes open, but still totally dependent. Whoever had them either didn't know how to care for them or didn't bother to try. Her expression darkened. "Probably got them as Christmas puppies last year and didn't spay the mother. Then when she had puppies, they were just an inconvenience. Happens all the time." Jack felt that same surge of anger he'd experienced on the roadside. "I still can't believe someone would just throw them away." "People do worse," Melissa said quietly, but didn't elaborate. Instead, she handed him a card. "This is the emergency vet where I work. Call if anything changes, day or night. And bring them in tomorrow morning if they make it through the night. Dr. Reyes will want to see them. If they make it through the night." The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of just how precarious the puppy's situation was. After Dave and Melissa left, Jack set up a cozy nest for the puppies in a cardboard box lined with blankets, the heating pad beneath providing gentle warmth. He placed it next to his bed, where he could hear them if they needed him. True to Melissa's instructions, he woke every 2 hours through the night to feed the puppies, clean them, and make sure they were warm enough. By dawn, he was exhausted but relieved. Both puppies had made it through the night, and the little female seemed to have gained some strength. "You're tougher than you look," he told her as he fed her the morning bottle. "Both of you." He'd started thinking of them as Chance and Lucky, names that seemed fitting given their narrow escape from the garbage truck. Chance, the male, was already showing signs of a playful personality, batting at Jack's fingers with tiny paws when he wasn't eating. Lucky, the female, was quieter, more watchful, but she had a certain determination that Jack admired. As he prepared to take them to the vet, Jack's phone rang. It was Dave. "How are the fur babies?" his friend asked without preamble. "Hanging in there," Jack replied. "About to take them to the vet now." Good, good. Listen, I hate to ask, but are you coming in today? The contractor meeting got moved up, and they're asking for you specifically." Jack hesitated, looking at the puppies in their box. "I don't know, Dave. They need a lot of care right now." "I get it," Dave said quickly. "But you know how these bigwigs are. They want to talk to the man in charge, and that's you. Meeting's at 2. Maybe you could drop the pups at Melissa's clinic for a few hours." Jack sighed. He had responsibilities, people who counted on him. The community center project was important. It would provide after-school programs, job training, and a safe space for kids in a neighborhood that desperately needed it. "I'll see what I can do," he said finally. "Let me talk to the vet first." Dr. Reyes was a compact woman with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes behind practical glasses. She examined Chance and Lucky with careful precision, confirming Melissa's initial assessment and adding a few concerns of her own. "The female, Lucky, you said, has a heart murmur. It might resolve as she grows, but it's something to watch. And both have respiratory infections, which isn't surprising given where you found them." She prescribed antibiotics and a special high-calorie diet, then showed Jack how to administer the medicine using a dropper. "They're very young to be without their mother," she explained, scratching Chance behind his ears as the puppy leaned into her touch. "The next few weeks will be critical. They'll need constant care." Jack nodded, his mind already working through the logistics. "Could they stay here during the day? Just for a few hours while I'm at work?" Dr. Reyes looked thoughtful. "We're not really set up for that kind of care. The techs all have their assigned duties, and puppies this young need one-on-one attention." Seeing Jack's crestfallen expression, she added, "But I might have another solution. Let me make a call." She stepped out of the examination room briefly, returning with a smile. "I've got someone who can help. Ellie Gardner. She's a retired nurse who fosters for our local rescue. She specializes in neonatal cases. She could take the puppies during the day while you're at work, at least until they're a bit older and more stable." Relief washed over Jack. "That would be amazing. Are you sure she wouldn't mind?" "Mind? Ellie lives for this stuff," Dr. Reyes assured him. "She's on her way over now. You can meet her and see if it's a good fit." Ellie Gardner turned out to be a sprightly woman in her 70s with a cloud of white hair and sparkling blue eyes that assessed Jack with frank curiosity. "So you're the motorcycle man who rescued these little ones," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Good for you. Most people would have kept on driving." There was something about Ellie that reminded Jack of his grandmother, a no-nonsense practicality combined with bottomless compassion. She examined the puppies with expert hands, cooing to them softly as she checked their gums, ears, and paws. "They're fighters, these two," she declared. "Especially this little girl. Got a real spark in her eyes." She looked up at Jack. "Dr. Reyes tells me you need someone to puppy sit while you're at work." Jack nodded, explaining his situation, the construction job, the community center, the meeting that afternoon. "Well, I've got plenty of time and plenty of experience," Ellie said. "I've raised more orphan puppies and kittens than I can count. These two will be in good hands with me." They worked out an arrangement. Jack would drop the puppies off at Ellie's house on his way to work and pick them up on his way home. She refused his offer of payment, saying only, "You saved their lives, young man. The least I can do is help you keep them alive." With that settled, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He could fulfill his work obligations without abandoning the puppies that had so unexpectedly come into his life. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Jack would wake early to feed Chance and Lucky, then drop them off at Ellie's tidy bungalow on his way to the construction site. In the evenings, he'd pick them up, often staying for a cup of coffee and a chat before taking the growing puppies home. Ellie, he discovered, was a widow whose husband had been a veterinarian before his death 10 years earlier. They'd never had children, pouring their love instead into the countless animals they'd rescued together. Walter would have loved these two, she told Jack one evening as they watched the puppies tumble across her living room floor. At 5 weeks old, Chance and Lucky were growing stronger every day, their once-dull coats now gleaming with health, their eyes bright with curiosity and mischief. "Lucky reminds me of a dog we had when I was first married," Ellie continued, smiling at the memory. "A golden retriever mix named Sunshine. Smartest dog I ever knew. She could open doors, fetch the newspaper, even learned to bring Walter his slippers when he came home tired from the clinic." Jack watched the puppies play, marveling at their resilience. Lucky's heart murmur had already improved, and though she was still smaller than her brother, she more than made up for it in determination. Chance was the more easygoing of the two, content to lie at Jack's feet in the evenings while Lucky explored every corner of the house. "I never thought I'd have dogs," Jack admitted. "Always seemed like too much responsibility with my work schedule." Ellie gave him a knowing look. "And now?" Jack smiled ruefully. "Now I can't imagine not having them." It was true. In just a few short weeks, Chance and Lucky had transformed his quiet, ordered life into one filled with puppy toys, midnight feedings, and more love than he'd thought possible. His co-workers had noticed the change in him. He smiled more, laughed more easily. Even the community center project was benefiting from his newfound perspective. We should include a dog park, he'd suggested at a recent planning meeting. Something for the whole family to enjoy. The idea had been enthusiastically received, especially when Jack volunteered to help with the design during his off hours. As autumn deepened into winter, the puppies continued to thrive. They were nearly 3 months old now, fully weaned and starting basic training. Jack had officially adopted them, filling out the paperwork at Dr. Reyes's clinic and paying for their vaccinations and microchips. You know, Dr. Reyes said as she handed him their official health certificates, when Melissa first told me about these two, I didn't think the little one would make it. Lucky is aptly named. Jack nodded, watching as Lucky sat patiently for a treat while Chance squirmed beside her, unable to contain his excitement. They both are. And so am I, for finding them. The community center project was progressing well, on schedule to open in the spring. Jack had indeed designed a dog park as part of the outdoor recreational area, complete with agility equipment he'd tested at home with Chance and Lucky. Ellie still puppy sat occasionally, though the dogs were old enough now to stay alone for short periods. She'd become a friend to Jack, a surrogate grandmother who brought homemade dog treats and knitted puppy sweaters for the winter cold. You should bring them to the Christmas fair next weekend, she suggested one evening in early December. The rescue group I volunteer with has a booth. We could always use some ambassadors to show people how wonderful rescue dogs can be. Jack agreed, thinking it might be good socialization for the puppies. And so, on a crisp Saturday morning, he found himself at the Austin Holiday Market with Chance and Lucky on matching leashes, their golden coats brushed to a shine, red and green bandanas around their necks. They were a hit, drawing children and adults alike to the rescue booth where Ellie handed out brochures and information on responsible pet ownership. Jack found himself telling their story over and over, how he'd found them in the garbage, how close they'd come to being taken to the dump, how they'd flourished with proper care and love. I can't believe anyone would throw away puppies, one woman said, her face reflecting the same disbelief and anger Jack had felt that day on the roadside. Unfortunately, it happens all too often, Ellie explained gently. That's why we emphasize the importance of spaying and neutering, and why we try to match our rescue animals with responsible owners. As the afternoon wore on, Jack noticed a young family lingering near the booth, a man about his own age, a pregnant woman, and a little girl of about 6 or 7. The child was clearly entranced by Lucky, who responded to her gentle petting with enthusiastic licks. She's so soft, the little girl whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. And she likes me. She's a very good judge of character, Jack told her solemnly. The girl's father approached, looking a bit hesitant. Beautiful dogs, he said. Golden retrievers, right? Jack nodded. Mix, probably. Found them abandoned when they were just tiny. The man's expression darkened. That's terrible. Who would do that to puppies? It was a question Jack had asked himself 100 times since that September morning. He'd never found an answer that satisfied him. Some people don't see animals as living, feeling beings, Ellie interjected, having overheard the conversation. They see them as disposable, like objects. That's what we're trying to change, one heart at a time. The man nodded thoughtfully, then extended his hand to Jack. I'm Michael, by the way. This is my wife, Sarah, and our daughter, Emma. Introductions were made all around, and Jack learned that Michael was a teacher at an elementary school not far from where the community center was being built. We're actually looking for a dog, Sarah explained, resting one hand on her rounded belly. We want Emma to grow up with a pet, and with the new baby coming, we thought now might be a good time, before things get too hectic. These two aren't up for adoption, Ellie explained gently, seeing Emma's hopeful expression. But we have many wonderful dogs looking for homes. Emma looked disappointed but nodded bravely. Maybe we could find a dog like Lucky? One that needs a home. Jack felt a surge of emotion at the child's words. One that needs a home. Isn't that what everyone wanted, in the end? A place to belong, people who cared, a chance to be loved. You know, he said slowly, the rescue where Lucky and Chance got their vaccinations might have just what you're looking for. Dr. Reyes is always fostering dogs who need homes. The conversation continued, with Jack offering to put the family in touch with Dr. Reyes. By the time they parted ways, Emma was chattering excitedly about the possibility of a dog of her own, and Michael and Sarah were asking thoughtful questions about adoption requirements and responsible ownership. You're good at this, Ellie observed after the family moved on. Ever thought about volunteering with the rescue yourself? Jack hadn't, but the idea took root. He was already planning to bring Chance and Lucky to the community center once it opened. Therapy dogs were proven to help children with reading difficulties and social anxiety. Why not extend that involvement to the rescue organization as well? The community center opened on a bright April day, almost 7 months to the day after Jack had found the puppies. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was attended by local officials, community members, and, at Jack's insistence, Dr. Reyes and her rescue volunteers, who set up an adoption event in the brand-new dog park. Chance and Lucky, now handsome young dogs with impeccable manners, most of the time, wore special vests identifying them as community center ambassadors. They greeted visitors with wagging tails and gentle demeanor, living proof of the power of second chances. Michael and his family were there, along with their newly adopted dog, a sweet-natured border collie mix named Star who'd been found wandering near a highway. Emma proudly showed Star to Jack, explaining how they'd chosen her because she needed us, just like Lucky needed you. As Jack watched the little girl lead her dog around the park, he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Ray, the garbage collector, dressed in civilian clothes but instantly recognizable. "Well, I'll be," Ray said, grinning at the sight of Chance and Lucky. "Look at these two. Hard to believe they're the same scared little critters from the trash heap." Jack shook the man's hand warmly. "Never got a chance to thank you properly for that day." Ray waved away the thanks. "Didn't do anything special. You're the one who stopped and actually did something. Most people would have just kept going. Figured it wasn't their problem." Jack thought about how close he'd come to doing just that, riding past, staying focused on his destination rather than the journey. How many times in life did people miss opportunities to make a difference because they were too busy, too preoccupied, too certain of their own path? "I'm glad I stopped," Jack said simply. The afternoon sun bathed the new community center in golden light as children played in the dog park, adults chatted on newly installed benches, and volunteers introduced potential adopters to dogs looking for forever homes. Jack felt a sense of completion, of rightness, that went beyond the successful construction project. In the end, he reflected, it wasn't just Chance and Lucky who'd been rescued that September morning. In saving them, Jack had also saved a part of himself, a capacity for compassion, for connection, for seeing beyond the surface of things to the precious life beneath. A life worth saving, worth nurturing, worth loving. "Come on, you two," he said to his dogs, who looked up at him with absolute trust and affection. "Let's go meet some more friends." Together, they walked into the future they'd created, a future built on an unexpected moment of grace beside a pile of garbage, where 2 tiny lives had been discarded but not forgotten. Not abandoned, after all, but found, saved, loved. As Lucky leaned against his leg, her golden coat shining in the sun, Jack knew with absolute certainty that opening that grimy blue bag had been the most important thing he'd ever done. Not because of what he'd found inside, but because of what that discovery had awakened in him. The knowledge that every life has value, that every being deserves care, and that sometimes, the things we throw away are the very things we need most.